The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a metal canyon, its walls gleaming under artificial stars. 247 species gathered here, each one believing they had evolved beyond the primitive need for violence. Jiho Park stood at the human podium, his hands trembling slightly as he held the datapad containing 6 months of evidence. Around him, aliens of every conceivable shape watched with expressions ranging from boredom to mild curiosity. Jiho began his presentation with a steady voice, though his heart pounded in his chest. Images appeared on the massive holographic display above the council floor. Burning colonies, destroyed homes, lists of names, thousands of them, all dead or missing. The human settlements on the outer rim had become hunting grounds for the Vexry Empire, a civilization that had spent the last 3 centuries expanding its territory through intimidation and selective violence. 14 attacks in 6 months, Jiho said, his voice echoing through the chamber. 50,000 human casualties. Men, women, and children taken as slaves or killed outright. We have documented everything. We have followed every protocol. We have exhausted every diplomatic channel. We come before this council not as warriors, but as a people asking for justice. The Vexry representative, a tall creature with purple skin and 4 arms, made a dismissive gesture. The colonies were built in disputed territory. Humanity was warned that those regions were claimed by the Vexry Empire. They chose to ignore our warnings. The consequences are their own fault. Jiho's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. The territories were unclaimed according to council law. We followed the proper procedures. We registered our settlements. We paid the fees. Everything was legal and proper. Council Elder Cormethus, an insectoid being whose species had been part of the council for over 3,000 years, clicked his mandibles together in what might have been amusement. Ambassador Park, humanity has been a council member for only 80 years. Perhaps you do not yet understand how these matters work. Border disputes take time to resolve. The proper committees must review the claims. Studies must be conducted. Rushing to judgment would be unwise. Studies? Jiho's voice rose slightly before he caught himself. Elder, with respect, people are dying while committees meet. The Vexry are not studying anything. They are raiding, killing, and enslaving human beings. We need action, not more studies. Around the chamber, various species whispered among themselves. Some seemed sympathetic, but most appeared unconcerned. The problems of young species were rarely taken seriously by those who had been in the council for millennia. To them, humanity was barely more than children playing at civilization. The vote came quickly. The council decided to study the matter further and establish a committee to review the territorial claims. It was a polite way of doing nothing. Jiho stood at the podium for a long moment after the vote, his datapad still displaying images of destroyed homes and grieving families. Then he gathered his materials and left the chamber without another word. On Earth, in the orbital military complex above the Atlantic Ocean, Captain Daeho Kim received a coded transmission from the Admiralty. He read it twice, then called his senior officers to the briefing room. The men and women who gathered there were veterans, most of them having served in various peacekeeping missions around human space. They knew what it meant when fleet mobilization orders came through channels this secure. The council vote failed, Daeho said simply. Ambassador Park tried everything. They're not going to help us. One of the junior officers, a young woman named Hannah, spoke up. So what do we do? Just let the Vexry keep attacking our people? Daeho looked at the mobilization orders again. No, we don't let them keep attacking. We're going to war. The room fell silent. War was not something the Galactic Council engaged in anymore. Conflicts were resolved through negotiation, trade sanctions, or diplomatic pressure. The idea of one species actually attacking another in open warfare was considered barbaric, a relic of primitive times that civilized beings had evolved beyond. At Fleet Command on Mars, Admiral Hayami Choi stood in front of a massive tactical display showing the disposition of every human military vessel in known space. It was not an impressive sight compared to some of the older council species. Humanity had spent most of its resources on exploration and colonization, not war. Their fleet was designed primarily for defense and patrol work, not offensive operations. But Hayemi had spent 20 years studying military history, both human and alien. She knew something the Council had forgotten. Humans had never stopped fighting wars. Even in their brief time in space, human military academies still taught tactics from ancient Earth conflicts. They studied strategy, logistics, combined arms doctrine, and psychological warfare. While other species wrote poetry about their peaceful nature, humans wrote field manuals about how to win battles. Begin Phase 1 mobilization, Hayemi ordered. Recall all ships to their home bases. Activate reserve units. Contact the civilian shipyards and tell them we're requisitioning every vessel that can be converted for military use. And send a message to the Colonial Defense Forces. Tell them we're coming. Her staff officers moved quickly to execute the orders. Within hours, human ships across known space began turning toward home. Civilian freighters received instructions to report for retrofit. Reserve soldiers got recall notices. The entire human sphere began shifting from a peacetime economy to a war footing, back at the Galactic Council Station. Jiho Park returned to the Great Chamber 3 days after the failed vote. The Council was in session, discussing trade agreements between two species whose names Jiho barely remembered. He waited patiently for a break in the proceedings, then requested permission to address the Assembly. Elder Kermathis looked annoyed but granted the request. Ambassador Park, if you wish to submit additional evidence for the committee to review, you may do so through proper channels. There is no need to interrupt council business. Jiho walked to the human podium one last time. He carried no datapad, no evidence, no lengthy presentation. He simply stood there and spoke clearly so every species in the chamber could hear him. Humanity withdraws its petition to the council, he said. We asked for justice. You offered us bureaucracy. We asked for protection. You offered us committees. We came here believing in the principles this council claims to uphold. We were wrong. The chamber buzzed with surprised chatter. Species did not withdraw petitions. It was considered improper, a breach of protocol. What do you intend to do? Kermathis asked, his mandibles clicking with what might have been concern. Jiho looked directly at the Vexri representative, then back at the elder. We will handle this ourselves. The Vexri Empire has made war on humanity. Humanity accepts that war, and humanity will finish it. He turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving behind 247 species who had no idea what they had just unleashed upon the galaxy. The news spread across the galaxy like ripples in a pond. Humanity was mobilizing for war. To most council species it seemed almost quaint, like watching children play soldier. After all, humans had been spacefaring for barely 2 centuries. What did they know about real military operations? The general consensus among galactic observers was that humanity would launch a few retaliatory strikes, lose badly, and then come crawling back to the council asking for mediation. Soman Lee disagreed with that assessment. As a war correspondent who had covered conflicts on a dozen human colony worlds, she knew something about her species that the aliens did not. Humans never forgot how to fight. She stood on the observation deck of Earth's largest orbital shipyard, watching as hundreds of vessels moved in carefully choreographed patterns. Civilian freighters were being stripped down and rebuilt with weapon mounts. Passenger liners were being converted into troop carriers. Even mining ships were being fitted with military-grade sensors and communication arrays. It's beautiful in a terrible way, said the cameraman beside her. A young man named Inho. All this industry turning toward destruction. Soman nodded, recording her observations into her personal log. The galaxy thinks we're being foolish. They think we'll tire of war quickly like they did. But they don't understand. We never stopped preparing for this. Every human who studies history knows that peace is maintained through strength, not wishful thinking. Thousands of kilometers away on Mars, Commander Ting Xin put his strike teams through another round of combat drills. The training facility was built to simulate boarding actions on enemy vessels, complete with artificial gravity shifts, decompression scenarios, and hostile defenders. Tiang's teams had to master fighting in zero gravity, in high gravity, in toxic atmospheres, and in complete darkness. The Vexri relied on their technological superiority and formal military traditions. Tiang was teaching his soldiers to fight dirty. "Remember," he shouted over the sounds of simulated weapons fire, "the Vexri expect everyone to follow their rules of engagement. They announce their intentions before attacking. They allow time for surrenders. They consider it honorable warfare. We will not be honorable. We will be effective." One of his squad leaders, a woman named Bitna, approached after the drill ended. "Sir, some of the troops are uncomfortable with these tactics. They say it feels like we're training to be pirates, not soldiers." Tiang understood the concern. Humanity had spent decades trying to prove to the Council that they were civilized, that they deserved respect. These tactics felt like a step backward. "Tell them this," he said. "The Vexri killed 50,000 of our people. They enslaved our colonists. They did this because they thought we would follow the rules, that we would be civilized and wait for the Council to save us. We tried civilization. It failed. Now we do what we must to bring our people home." At the Luna shipyards, engineer Minho Kong reviewed the retrofit plans for the civilian vessels. His team had been working for 72 hours straight, surviving on stimulants and pure determination. The challenge was enormous. They needed to convert hundreds of ships that were never designed for combat into something that could survive in a war zone. Armor plating, weapon systems, shield generators, all of it had to be integrated into vessels built for cargo and passengers. "The Council species will expect military vessels," Minho explained to his exhausted team. "They'll have tactical databases showing our fleet composition. When we show up with converted civilian ships, it will confuse their targeting systems. They'll waste time trying to identify if we're military or civilian. That confusion might save lives." His assistant engineer, a woman named Ji Wu, looked skeptical. "Or it might get our people killed when a cargo freighter tries to fight a military cruiser." "That's why we're putting the best sensor arrays on these ships," Minho replied. "They won't fight? They'll scout, relay information, provide electronic warfare support. We fight smart, not fair." The Galactic Council watched humanity's preparations with growing bewilderment. Intelligence reports showed humans activating reserve forces, mobilizing civilian industry, and conducting military exercises on a scale the galaxy had not seen in centuries. Most Council members still believed it was an overreaction, a young species throwing a tantrum. But a few, like Elder Chromathus, began to feel uneasy. The humans were not preparing for a limited engagement. They were preparing for total war. Diplomatic Officer Yunji Han made one final attempt to resolve the situation peacefully. She requested an audience with the Vexri Emperor, hoping that the sight of humanity's military buildup might convince him to negotiate. The Emperor received her in his palace, a sprawling complex of purple crystal and flowing water. He listened politely to her proposal for a peaceful resolution, then dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "Your species is young and impulsive," the Emperor said. "You think you can frighten us with threats of violence? But the Vexri Empire has existed for 3,000 years. We have fought and won 100 wars. Your little fleet does not concern us. Return to your council and tell them we will consider negotiations only after humanity accepts responsibility for illegally colonizing our territory." Yunji reported the failure to Admiral Hayemi Choi, who received the news without surprise. "We gave them every chance," the Admiral said. "History will record that we tried peace first." On the colony world of New Bizan, Colonel Junho Park drilled his ground forces in preparation for planetary assault operations. Unlike space combat, which was relatively new to humanity, ground warfare was something humans had perfected over millennia of practice. Junho's soldiers trained in urban combat, wilderness survival, hostage rescue, and siege warfare. They learned to fight in every environment humans had ever colonized. From frozen tundra to burning deserts to toxic swamps, Intelligence Officer Unisong worked from a secure facility, deep underground on Earth. analyzing every piece of data humanity had gathered about the Vexry military. Their fleet compositions, their base locations, their supply lines, their communication protocols. She built detailed models of their command structure and identified weak points in their logistics network. The Vexry had grown complacent over centuries of easy victories against species that followed the Council's rules of civilized warfare. Una intended to exploit every weakness. 3 weeks after Jiho Park's declaration to the Council, Admiral Jaime Choi stood before the assembled human fleet. Over 500 vessels hung in space around Earth, from massive battleships to converted civilian freighters. It was not the largest fleet in the galaxy, not by far, but it was the most motivated. Her speech was broadcast to every ship, every military base, every colony in human space. "The Council failed us," she said simply. "They sat in their comfortable chambers and debated while our people died. They told us to be patient, to follow procedures, to trust in their process. We trusted them, and they betrayed that trust. Now we stand alone, but we do not stand afraid. We are going to war not because we love violence, but because we love our people more." The Vexry wanted to test humanity's resolve. They thought we were weak because we sought peace. They will learn their mistake. Every human who has ever lived has known one universal truth. There are some things worth fighting for. Our families are worth fighting for. Our freedom is worth fighting for. Our future is worth fighting for. Let's go bring our people home. The fleet began to move, hundreds of ships accelerating toward the edge of human space. On worlds across the galaxy, billions of beings watched the broadcasts and wondered. What had the Council unleashed by refusing to help the humans? What happened when you backed a species into a corner and gave them no choice but to fight? The galaxy was about to find out. The Vexry military commander of Station Vex Prime was enjoying his morning meal when the alarms began screaming. He set down his drink with mild irritation, expecting another drill or perhaps a malfunction in the sensor grid. The station had stood on the border of Vexry space for 200 years without incident. Nothing ever happened here. It was considered a prestigious but boring assignment, a place where senior officers went to coast toward retirement. Then the human fleet dropped out of. Faster than light traveled directly on top of the station. There was no warning, no formal declaration of hostilities, no time given for surrender. The first the station knew of the attack was when human missiles began slamming into the shield generators. Within 30 seconds, 3 of the 4 generators were destroyed. Within 60 seconds, human fighters were strafing the station's weapon emplacements with precision that suggested they had been studying the station's defenses for months. Captain Daeho Kim stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the tactical display with satisfaction. "All wings, continue your attack runs. Support ships, begin jamming their communications. I want them confused and isolated." The Vexry commander frantically tried to organize a defense, but nothing in his training had prepared him for this. Council species did not attack without warning. They sent formal challenges. They allowed time for diplomatic solutions. They followed the accepted protocols of civilized warfare. These humans ignored every rule. Commander Taiyang Shin's boarding teams launched from assault ships, magnetic clamps securing them to the station's hull. Within minutes, they had breached the outer doors and were pouring into the corridors. The Vexry security forces responded, but they moved slowly, forming up in proper military formations as their doctrine required. Taiyang's teams did not form up. They moved like water, flowing through corridors, using every piece of cover, hitting the Vexry from unexpected angles. "Stun grenades in the command center," Taiyang ordered. "Non-lethal force when possible, but survival is priority one. Move fast, stay unpredictable." The Vexry had not fought a boarding action in over 300 years. Their soldiers were well trained in theory, but had no practical experience. The humans, by contrast, had been practicing urban combat and close-quarters battle for thousands of years. It showed. Within 2 hours, Station Vex Prime was in human hands. The same scenario played out at 2 other Vexry installations. The attacks came simultaneously, coordinated across vast distances with timing that impressed even the human commanders. Engineer Minho Kong's converted civilian vessels proved their worth, using their non-standard sensor signatures to confuse Vex retargeting systems. Ships that looked like cargo freighters on scanners suddenly deployed weapon systems and launched fighters. It was not honorable warfare. It was effective warfare. Intelligence officer Yuna Song monitored communications from a command ship safely behind the front lines. She listened as Vexry commanders tried to coordinate their defenses, their voices rising in pitch as they realized that humans were not following any recognized tactical doctrine. "They're panicking," she reported to Admiral Hayami Choi. "They keep asking each other how the humans are doing this, where they learned these tactics. They're looking for a pattern they can counter, but we're not giving them one." The Admiral nodded, studying casualty reports. Human losses were lighter than expected, though still painful. Every name on the list represented someone's child, someone's parent, someone's friend. "Continue operations as planned. I want the next wave launching within 12 hours. Don't give them time to adapt." On the Galactic Council station, emergency sessions were being called. Species representatives watched the battle footage with expressions ranging from shock to horror. The humans were fighting with a savagery that seemed antithetical to civilization. They used ambush tactics, psychological warfare, electronic deception. They struck from unexpected directions and retreated before the enemy could respond. It was not the kind of warfare the Council approved of. Elder Cormathus watched the footage of human boarding teams moving through Station Vex Prime and felt his mandibles twitch with something he had not experienced in decades: fear. "How did they learn to fight like this?" he asked his aides. "They have only been in space for 2 centuries. One of the younger council members, a species that still remembered what warfare looked like, answered quietly. "They never stopped learning, Elder. While we wrote poetry about peace, they wrote manuals about war. We thought we had evolved beyond violence. They knew better." The Vexry Empire demanded emergency council intervention. Their representatives stood before the assembly and declared that humanity was committing war crimes, that their tactics were barbaric and uncivilized. They showed footage of human soldiers using flashbang grenades, of fighters hiding behind asteroids to ambush patrols, of electronic warfare systems jamming communications. To species that had not fought real wars in millennia, it all looked shockingly brutal. Ambassador Jiho Park listened to the Vexry representative's speech, then requested permission to respond. "War crimes?" he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You speak to us of war crimes? You who raided our colonies? You who enslaved our people? You who killed 50,000 human beings? We are bringing our people home. If that offends your sense of civilized behavior, perhaps you should have thought about that before you started this war." The council erupted in debate. Some species called for sanctions against humanity. Others, mostly younger species who still remembered being vulnerable, quietly cheered. The older species, the ones who had been in the council for millennia, struggled to understand what was happening. The carefully maintained galactic order was cracking, and they did not know how to fix it. On the front lines, Captain Daeho Kim prepared his fleet for the next operation. They had captured 3 installations, but that was just the beginning. Intelligence reports showed 19 more military targets between here and the Vexry core systems. His fleet was tired, battered, but determined. They had proven they could fight. Now they needed to prove they could win. Somin Lee, the war correspondent, interviewed soldiers returning from the boarding actions. They spoke of fear, of adrenaline, of the strange disconnect between training and reality, but they also spoke of purpose. Every station they captured meant rescued colonists, disrupted supply lines, Vexry forces unable to attack human worlds. The war was terrible, but it was necessary. One young soldier, a man named Kwan, summed it up simply. "I never wanted to fight. None of us did. But someone has to stand between our families and those who would harm them. The council wouldn't do it. So we will." 48 hours after the first attacks, the Vexry military command was in chaos. 3 major installations lost, dozens of ships destroyed or captured, communications networks compromised by human electronic warfare. Their emperor called an emergency war council, demanding to know how a young, primitive species was winning battles against an empire 3,000 years old. His military advisors had no good answers. The humans did not fight like civilized beings. They did not announce their intentions. They did not follow the rules. They struck where they were not expected and vanished before reinforcements arrived. Trying to fight them was like trying to grab smoke on Earth. Admiral Hayami Choi received reports of the victories and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. They had proven their point. Humanity could fight. Humanity could win. But she knew the hard part was just beginning. The Vexri Empire was vast, and they would not surrender easily. The war would get worse before it got better. She looked at the casualty lists again, at the names of those who had already paid the price, and steeled herself for what was to come. In the Galactic Council chambers, Elder Cormathis watched battle footage and realized something that filled him with dread. The humans were not fighting to make a point. They were not fighting to gain leverage for negotiations. They were fighting to win, completely and totally. And unless someone stopped them, they would burn the Vexri Empire to ashes to achieve that goal. The galaxy had unleashed something it did not understand and could not control. The age of peaceful coexistence was over, killed by the Council's own indifference to injustice. 3 months into the war, the galaxy had stopped laughing at humanity. The news networks that once mocked human military capabilities now ran constant coverage of human victories. System after system fell to human forces. The Vexri Empire, which had stood unchallenged for centuries, was collapsing under the weight of an enemy that refused to fight by the rules. Colonel Junho Park stood in the ruins of what had been a Vexri labor camp. Around him, freed human colonists sat wrapped in thermal blankets, many of them too traumatized to speak. Medical teams moved among them, treating injuries and malnutrition. Some of the prisoners had been held for over a year. The stories they told would haunt Junho for the rest of his life. Children separated from parents. Families worked to death in mining operations. Punishments for the smallest infractions. "How many camps like this are there?" asked one of his junior officers. A young lieutenant named Tae Hyun.Junho looked at his tactical display, which showed 17 more suspected labor camp locations. "Too many, and we have to liberate every single one." He keyed his radio. "Command, this is Ground Force Alpha. Camp 7 is secure. We have 300 survivors ready for evacuation. Continuing to next objective." The ground campaign was brutal work. Unlike the space battles, which were fast and decisive, ground operations meant clearing every building, searching every tunnel, securing every prisoner. The Vexri had fortified their installations, but their defensive doctrine assumed attackers would give warnings and follow siege protocols. Human forces bypassed strong points, hit supply lines, and used artillery with devastating precision. They did not ask for surrender. They simply destroyed resistance and moved on. In space, Captain Daeho Kim's fleet had been fighting continuously for 3 months. His ship showed the scars of dozens of battles. Crew members worked double shifts to keep systems operational. Casualties mounted steadily. Every day brought new names to add to the memorial lists. Every day they pushed deeper into Vexri territory. "Captain, we have incoming transmission from Admiral Choi," his communications officer reported. "Priority channel." Daeho accepted the connection. The Admiral's face appeared on the screen, and he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She looked like she had aged 10 years in 3 months. "Daeho, I need your fleet to hold position for 72 hours. The repair ships need time to catch up, and your crews need rest. Admiral, intelligence shows a major Vexri supply depot 2 systems away. If we hit it now, we can cripple their logistics for this entire sector." "I know. And if we push your crews any harder, they'll start making mistakes. Tired people die, Captain. We cannot win this war by killing our own forces through exhaustion. Hold position." "That's an order." Daeho closed the connection and looked at his crew. The Admiral was right. They were running on fumes and determination. All ships were holding position for 3 days. Rotate crew for rest periods. Maintenance teams have priority on all systems. Let's use this time to get back to fighting shape. On the Galactic Council station, emergency sessions had become the norm. Every day brought new reports of human advances, Vexry defeats, and escalating violence. Ambassador Jiho Park attended these sessions but rarely spoke. He simply sat at the human podium and watched as the same species that had ignored humanity's pleas for help now demanded that humanity stop fighting, one council member. A floating gas being from a species known for philosophy addressed the assembly. This war must end. The humans are setting a dangerous precedent. If we allow this to continue, other species might believe they can solve problems through violence rather than diplomacy. Jiho stood slowly. Other species might believe they need to be able to defend themselves, yes. They might realize that asking nicely gets you nowhere when your enemy does not care about diplomacy. We asked for your help. You refused. Now you ask us to stop defending ourselves. The answer is no, but the casualties. Another representative protested. Both sides are suffering terrible losses. Surely negotiation is preferable to this bloodshed. We tried negotiation, Jiho replied. For 6 months we tried? My people died while you studied the matter? Now we are bringing them home, whatever the cost. If that makes us uncivilized in your eyes, so be it. We would rather be uncivilized and alive than civilized and enslaved. The debate continued, but Jiho knew it was meaningless. The council could pass all the resolutions it wanted. Humanity would not stop until every enslaved colonist was freed and the Vexry Empire no longer posed a threat. War correspondent Somin Lee continued documenting the conflict. Though the content of her reports had grown darker, she no longer filmed exciting battle footage or interviewed confident soldiers. Instead, she showed the cost. Exhausted medics working in field hospitals. Pilots who stared at nothing after losing their wingmates. Ground troops who flinched at loud noises. The memorial services for those who would never come home. People need to see this, she told her cameraman Inho as they filmed another funeral service. They need to understand what war actually means. It's not glory and heroism. It's pain and loss and trauma that will last for generations. Admiral Hayami Choi watched Summon's reports and approved their broadcast. The human public needed to understand what their military was enduring. They needed to see the price of victory. But she also knew that showing the cost was necessary to maintain support. Wars were not won just by soldiers. They were won by entire civilizations committed to the effort. The mounting casualties wore on her. Every morning she received updated lists. Every night she wrote letters to families. Every day she made decisions that would result in more deaths. But she could not stop. The Vexry would not surrender, and halfway measures would only prolong the suffering. Intelligence Officer Unisong discovered something troubling and intercepted Vexry communications. The Empire was requesting aid from other council species. They were offering trade concessions, territory, political favors, anything to get help against the humans. Most species declined, citing the Council's traditional neutrality in conflicts. But a few showed interest. Yuna reported her findings to Admiral Choi. Ma'am, if other species join the Vexry, we could be facing a much larger war. Our forces are already stretched thin. The Admiral studied the intelligence reports. Contact Diplomatic Officer Yunji Han. She needs to work her channels and make it clear that any species helping the Vexry will be considered hostile to humanity. We cannot fight the entire galaxy, but we can make them think twice about opposing us. Yunji Han had spent 3 months working behind the scenes, maintaining humanity's relationships with neutral species and isolating the Vexry diplomatically. It was delicate work. Many species sympathized with the Vexry's position, seeing humanity as dangerous upstarts who threatened the established order. But many more remembered being young and vulnerable themselves. They watched humanity's war and quietly admired the determination, even if they could not say so publicly. The key is making them more afraid of us than they are sympathetic to the Vexry, Yunji explained to her staff. We need to be strong enough that helping our enemies seems like a very bad idea, but reasonable enough that staying neutral seems smart. Engineer Minho Kong worked miracles keeping the fleet operational. His teams had developed rapid repair techniques that would have seemed impossible before the war. They learned to cannibalize damaged ships to repair others. They jury-rigged solutions to problems that should have required shipyard facilities. Military necessity drove innovation in ways peacetime never could. "We're running out of spare parts," Minho reported to his superiors. "The production facilities on Earth and Mars are working at maximum capacity, but we're burning through materials faster than they can replace them. We need the war to end soon or the fleet will start falling apart." Captain Daeho Kim's fleet reached the edge of the Vexry core systems after 3 months of constant fighting. Before them lay the heart of the Empire, including their homeworld. Taking it would require a siege, and sieges were long, bloody affairs. His crews were exhausted. His ships were battered. But they were closer to ending the war than anyone had thought possible when this started. He called a meeting of his senior officers. "The Admiral wants recommendations. Do we have enough strength left to take the core systems, or do we need to wait for reinforcements?" The debate was intense. Some officers argued for pushing forward while the Vexry were off balance. Others urged caution, noting their depleted supplies and exhausted crews. Finally, Daeho made his decision. "We push forward. Not because it's easy, but because every day we wait is another day our people spend in Vexry camps. We came here to bring them home. Let's finish this." The fleet began moving toward the Vexry homeworld. Behind them lay 3 months of victories and losses, of heroism and horror, of determination and desperation. Ahead lay the final test. The galaxy watched and wondered how it would end. The siege of the Vexry homeworld began on a cold morning by Earth calendar, though time meant little in the void of space. Captain Daeho Kim positioned his fleet in a sphere around the planet, cutting off all traffic in and out. No ships would escape. No reinforcements would arrive. The Vexry Empire's heart was now surrounded by an enemy that had spent 4 months proving they could not be stopped. The Vexry Emperor stared at the tactical displays showing human ships everywhere around his world and felt something his species had not experienced in 1,000 years, genuine fear of defeat. His military advisors stood silent, having run out of suggestions. Every strategy they tried, the humans countered. Every tactic they employed, the humans had already anticipated. It was as if they were fighting an enemy who had studied warfare for millennia, which in a way they were. "How long can we hold?" the Emperor asked his defense minister. "Our shields will last 6 days, maybe 7. We have supplies for 3 months if rationing is strict. But Majesty, the humans are not trying to starve us out. They are preparing for an assault." The Emperor looked at his world below, his beautiful capital city with its crystal towers and flowing gardens. All of it would be destroyed if the humans attacked in force. His advisors had assured him that humanity would tire of war, that they would accept a negotiated settlement. They had been wrong about everything. "Contact the human fleet," the Emperor said quietly. "Request terms for surrender." On the human command ship, Admiral Hayami Choi received the surrender request and read it carefully. After 4 months of war, after thousands of human casualties, after liberating dozens of prison camps, the Vexry were finally ready to talk. She did not feel victorious. She felt tired and sad and old. "Send them our terms," she instructed. "Full surrender. Immediate release of all human prisoners. War crimes trials for those responsible for camp atrocities. Complete demilitarization of the Vexry fleet. Reparations to be negotiated. And they have 12 hours to accept before we begin the assault." The Vexry delegation that came aboard the human flagship looked defeated and humiliated. They had expected to negotiate, to haggle over terms like civilized beings. Instead, they were presented with demands and told to accept them or face destruction. It was not how wars ended among council species. But then, this had not been a war fought by council rules. "These terms are harsh," the lead Vexry negotiator protested. "They will cripple our empire for generations." Admiral Choi looked at him without sympathy. "You enslaved our people. You killed thousands. You started a war you thought you could win easily because you believed we were weak. These terms are merciful compared to what you deserve. You have 11 hours and 46 minutes to decide. The Vexri accepted the terms with 4 hours remaining. There was no ceremony, no grand surrender aboard a flagship like in old Earth wars. Just a digital signature on a document and orders flowing to Vexri installations across their empire. Release the prisoners. Stand down military forces. Prepare for occupation and trials. Colonel Junho Park led the teams that entered the prison camps to formally liberate the remaining prisoners. Some camps had already been freed during the campaign, but the core systems held the largest facilities. Walking through those camps, seeing the conditions humans had endured, made Jin Honho understand why this war had been necessary. Some things could not be solved with diplomacy. One prisoner, an elderly woman named Myung, grabbed his hand as medics prepared her for evacuation. "We knew you would come," she said, tears streaming down her face. "They told us humanity had abandoned us, that the Council wouldn't help, but we knew our people would not leave us here. Thank you for proving us right." Junho could not speak. He just held her hand until the medics took her away. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to discuss the conclusion of the war. Ambassador Jiho Park attended, though he had little interest in their debates anymore. The Council had proven itself useless when it mattered. Now they wanted to discuss the implications of humanity's victory and what it meant for Galactic Order. Elder Cormathus addressed the assembly, his mandibles clicking nervously. The human victory over the Vexri has fundamentally altered the balance of power in this region of space. We must discuss new frameworks for conflict resolution, new protocols to prevent future wars. Jiho stood and walked to the human podium. "You want to prevent future wars? Then do your jobs. We came to you asking for help. You ignored us. You told us to wait, to be patient, to trust your process. We trusted you, and our people died because of it. If you want to prevent wars, then help species when they need it. Do not wait until they are desperate enough to fight." A younger council member, from a species that had only joined the council 3 centuries ago, spoke up. "The human delegate makes a valid point. Many of us have watched this war and remembered when we were vulnerable. The council talks about peace, but peace without justice is just tyranny by another name." The debate continued for hours, with older species defending the traditional council approach and younger species arguing for reform. Eventually, they passed new regulations requiring faster council response to member disputes and establishing an intervention force for humanitarian crises. It was progress, though it came too late for the 50,000 humans who had already died. War correspondent Soman Lee published her final report on the war. It was not a celebration of victory. It was a documentary of cost. She showed the faces of those who had died. She interviewed the survivors of the prison camps. She documented the physical and psychological wounds that would take years to heal. Her report ended with a simple statement: "Humanity won this war, but we all lost something in the fighting. Let us remember that before we celebrate too loudly." Intelligence Officer Yuna Song delivered her final briefing to Earth's leadership. 6 species had approached humanity requesting military alliances. 4 others had sent diplomatic overtures about trade and cooperation. The galaxy had learned that humanity was not to be underestimated. More importantly, they had learned that humanity would fight for its people when no one else would. "We've gained respect," Yuna summarized. "But we've also gained fear. Some species see us as heroes who stood up to tyranny. Others see us as dangerous warmongers who cannot be controlled. We need to be careful how we use this reputation." Engineer Min Ho Kong oversaw the conversion of warships back to peaceful purposes. It was bittersweet work. The vessels that had carried them to victory now needed to return to exploration and commerce. His teams removed weapon systems and restored cargo bays. They patched hull damage and upgraded civilian systems. Slowly, the fleet transformed from instruments of war back into tools of peace. Captain Daeho Kim received a medal for his service in a ceremony on Earth. Thousands attended, cheering for the war heroes who had brought their people home. But Deho felt uncomfortable with the celebration. He thought about the crews he had lost, the decisions that had resulted in deaths, the enemy soldiers who had died following their own orders. In his speech, he said simply, "We did not want this war. We tried every other option first. But when we had no choice, we fought. We fought for our families, our freedom, our future. I hope we never have to fight like this again. But if we do, I hope we remember the cost. War is not glorious. It is necessary sometimes, but it is never glorious. Remember the fallen. Honor them by working for a peace they would be proud of." Diplomatic officer Yunji Han took on the task of negotiating humanity's new position in the Galactic Council. The war had proven that humanity was a major power, not a minor species to be ignored. She negotiated for a permanent council seat, for humanity to have a voice in major galactic decisions, for the respect her species had earned through blood and sacrifice. The negotiations were difficult. Older species resented humanity's rapid rise. They argued that humanity was too aggressive, too unpredictable, too dangerous. Yunji countered every argument with cold facts. Humanity had followed all proper procedures before the war. Humanity had exhausted diplomatic options. Humanity had fought a defensive war to protect its people. If that made them dangerous, then perhaps the Council needed more dangerous species willing to stand up for justice. In the end, humanity gained its seat, though not without making concessions. They agreed to participate in the new Council Intervention Force. They agreed to share some of their military technology to help improve galactic security. They agreed to work within Council frameworks for future disputes. It was compromise, but it was also recognition. Admiral Hayami Choi retired 6 months after the war ended. She had spent 5 months writing letters to families, attending memorial services, and dealing with the aftermath of the conflict. The weight of command, of making decisions that cost lives, had aged her beyond her years. In her final address to the fleet, she said, "We won the war, but wars are never truly won. They are survived. Take care of each other. Take care of yourselves. And remember why we fought. Not for glory or conquest, but for the simple principle that our people deserve protection even when others will not provide it." Ambassador Jiho Park stood before the Galactic Council one last time before rotating back to Earth. The chamber was the same, but everything had changed.